Birth of a Democratic Nation. Guide to reading. Main idea. Political principles and major events shape how people form governments. Real-world civics. The air was hot and muggy, the sun beating down at midday, and the windows were tightly shut. As July 1776 began, dozens of men sat around these tables in Independence Hall in Philadelphia debating Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence. They were British subjects living in a British colony, so each man agreeing to this document was committing treason against his country. Treason was punishable by death. Yet 56 men signed the Declaration, which outlines the reason why America should declare itself a new and independent nation. On the 4th of July, these men announced to the world, "We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor," in the hope that they one day would be free. Colonial resistance. Main idea. The American colonists began to fight against British control. Separated from Great Britain by more than 3,000 miles, a vast ocean, and left largely to their own devices, the American colonists gained valuable experience in self-government. They learned how to manage their own affairs. This policy of loose control by the British was known as salutary or healthy neglect. Under this policy, the British did not insist on strict enforcement of laws. Mercantilism. Around 1760, when George III took the throne, Britain's policy toward the American colonies began to change. The British adopted a program called mercantilism. Mercantilism is the theory that a country's power depends on its wealth. A country should sell more goods to other countries than it buys. A favorable balance of trade, more exports, and fewer imports brings money into the country. For mercantilism to be successful, Great Britain needed the colonies to be a source of cheap raw materials. The Navigation Acts were a series of laws passed in the early 1760s that put the theory of mercantilism into practice. Growing tensions. Since the late 1600s, the British and the French had battled for supremacy in Europe and other parts of the world. After several wars in Europe, the fighting spilled over into North America. At a conference in Albany, New York in 1754, the colonies debated a plan for a federal union. The plan proposed by a committee led by Benjamin Franklin was rejected. However, the Albany plan showed that many colonists were already thinking about joining together for their common defense. From 1754 to 1763, Great Britain fought a long, costly war against France, the French and Indian War, winning French territory in North America. In order to prevent conflict with Native Americans over land, colonial settlers were forbidden to settle west of the Appalachian Mountains without permission from the British government. This proclamation of 1763 enraged many farmers and others who wanted the land. To pay off its heavy war debts, Britain placed steep taxes and new restrictions on the American colonies. The Stamp Act of 1765 required colonists to attach expensive tax stamps to all newspapers and legal documents. The Quartering Act required the colonies provide barracks and supplies to British troops, worsening relations. In protest, many colonists decided to boycott or refuse to buy British goods. Organizations known as the Sons of Liberty were formed throughout the colonies in opposition to the Stamp Act. Stamp Act Congress. In October of 1765, 9 of the 13 colonies sent representatives to the Stamp Act Congress held in New York City. The representatives prepared a declaration against the new British actions, which was sent to King George III. This action marked the first time that a majority of the colonies joined together to oppose British rule. As a result, the British Parliament repealed or canceled the Stamp Act. The same day it repealed the Stamp Act, Parliament passed the Declaratory Act of 1766, which stated that Parliament had the right to tax and make decisions for the American colonies in all cases. Then, in 1767, Parliament passed a set of laws that came to be known as the Townshend Acts. One of the Townshend Acts legalized the use of writs of assistance to assist customs officers in arresting smugglers. The writs were general search warrants that enabled customs officers to enter any location to look for evidence of smuggling. Angered by these laws, colonists caused trouble for British officials. The worst incident of violence took place in Boston. On March 5, 1770, British soldiers fired into a crowd, killing 5. The shootings became known as the Boston Massacre. New taxes and a Tea Party. The colonists resented the new taxes because they had no representatives in Parliament. As people living in Great Britain did, the colonists believed that Parliament had no right to tax them. They summed up their feelings with the slogan, "No taxation without representation." In 1773, Parliament passed another measure. The Tea Act gave the British East India Company the right to ship tea to the colonies without paying most of the taxes usually placed on tea. This made the East India Company tea cheaper than any other tea in the colonies, giving the British company an advantage over colonial merchants. In December 1773, a group of angry colonists dressed as Native Americans dumped 342 chests of British tea into Boston Harbor. In reaction to this protest, known as the Boston Tea Party, Parliament passed the Coercive Acts, which Americans called the Intolerable Acts. These laws restricted the colonists' civil rights, including the right to trial by jury. American biography, Thomas Jefferson, 1743 to 1826. Thomas Jefferson disliked public life. "I had rather be shut up in a very modest cottage with my books, my family, and a few friends," he once wrote. Jefferson acquired his lifelong love of books on science, philosophy, and literature from his childhood teachers. And as a student at William and Mary College, his enormous library later became the basis of the Library of Congress. Jefferson had the wealth and social status to live as he wished. However, abuses of power by the British pulled Jefferson from his beloved home at Monticello, Virginia, and launched him into a lifelong political career. Jefferson held a variety of offices. They included Governor of Virginia, Secretary of State, Vice President, and President of the United States. Yet when writing the words for his gravestone, Jefferson mentioned none of these offices. Instead, he wrote, "Here was buried Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of Independence, of the Statute of Virginia for Religious Freedom, and father of the University of Virginia." Moving toward independence.